Today on Biblical Higher Ed Talk, I sit down with Jesse Rine, Executive Director of the Center for Academic Faithfulness and Flourishing, an organization laser focused on providing information to the public about intentionally authentic Christian colleges and universities. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm your host, Philip Dearborn, president of ABHE, and my guest this week is Jesse Rine. Jesse is the executive director for the Center for Academic Faithfulness and Flourishing, an organization that he founded to provide information to the public about intentionally Christian colleges and universities. And Jesse, I think we met just over a year ago, and you've been able to be at several ABHE events. We've run into each other at a couple conferences along the way, but really appreciate the opportunity that you have to bring your experiences over into what I think is a tremendous resource for Christian families as they're considering Christian colleges. So welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Philip. It's great to be with you.
Absolutely. So, there was a time that when a college said that they were a Christian college, there was just kind of general understanding. We all knew what that meant. Today, not so much. So what has contributed to that? What has shifted kind of what a Christian college was and what a Christian college is today?
Sure. I mean, that's a really great question. And I think there are two ways that we can approach that. The first, I think, is historical. If we look back in the history of American higher education, as I'm sure many of your listeners are well aware, higher education in America has been a deeply Christian project at its roots, right? And every one of the colonial colleges were founded as explicitly Christian projects. And this was the dominant approach to American higher education. So that
I'll stop you right there, because I think there's a great point here that you just said, that historically, even when you dig deep with some of those all of those institutions at our founding as a country, they weren't just Christian in name. I mean, it was intense what they required. And we often referred to like Harvard University and the requirement that Harvard had of their students, men at the time, no women, but men at the time, that they had to commit to prayer and reading the Bible 3 times a day.
That's right. And even so they were not just Christian in name only. I mean, this was Christianity was the driving force behind the establishment of these institutions, and these denominations believed that it was for the betterment of society, that you needed to have ministers that could serve and help communities as they grow in the right direction in the new world. And if we fast forward all the way to the eve of the Civil War, something like 80% of the colleges in our nation were founded by Protestant denominations. And so then you ask the question, well, what shifted? Well, from a historical perspective, after the Civil War, you have the land-grant colleges that expand the curriculum beyond the traditional liberal arts. And you have these new schools of thought that begin to proliferate within these disciplines. So you have things like higher criticism, which undermine the divine nature of Scripture. You have things like logical positivism that undermine explanations, supernatural explanations, and elevated the empirical. You have things like Darwinian evolution that question human origins, right? And so what followed was a gradual falling away from founding mission. And we see this, the history of American higher education is Christian founding and abandonment over time. And so what makes it difficult when you're looking for a college, it might have the name Christian or a denominational name in the title of the institution, and it might even have some of the vestiges and trappings of that kind of prior life. But for all intents and purposes, these are just artifacts of a bygone era. And so I would say that the first way to answer it is think about it in historical terms. But the second, which I think is more concerning for the institutions that CAF is most interested in, is a professional explanation. So when we provide a professional lens, we can see that with authentic Christian colleges whose practice and policies are animated by that founding mission, they still operate within the shadow of that wider academy, most of which has abandoned Christian faith, right, and secularized. Right. And so that academy sets the standards for professional behavior, for best practice, right? And many of the faculty and administrators that work in Christian higher education have been trained by those guilds. And so they've been socialized by those professional associations, and they tend to find part of their professional identity, at least some of it, in these groups, right? And so it's natural to feel pressure to find ways to connect to those groups and adopt common standards where possible. And we should do that when it doesn't compromise mission. But you can easily imagine how this dynamic could result in compromise and drift over time. And that's why national associations like ABHE are so important. I see them as providing both a buttress to faithful practice, but then also offering a community of support for like-minded professionals, because it's hard to swim against the cultural tide. We need to have friends and supporters.
I like how you've expressed that, and I would agree with you for the role that we see our ABHE play. And I've often, been questioned, hey, the landscape has changed. Is it time for ABHE to perhaps broaden a little bit to be, more inclusive of institutions? And one of the things I say is no, I think before God, we have a responsibility to keep the boundaries in place, that this is what defines an institution of biblical and Christian higher education. And as long as you identify within that spectrum, we're gonna do everything we can to serve you. And if you as an institution choose to go beyond that range, it's not a judgment on us to say, you're doing a wrong thing. But what we're saying is what we won't change as a result of that, because we see one of our key roles of maintaining that integrity.
Absolutely. And I think having that clarity of purpose and just that willingness to say, this is who we are, and we know who we're not. And when you start to move into the area of who we're not, then we aren't really able to effectively serve you and the institutions we made these commitments to. So we wish you well, but that's our role in the ecosystem.
Yeah. The other thing that you said, I think is such a critical, just a general leadership lesson about mission drift, is it doesn't happen overnight. It happens over a period of time. And a lot of times it's well-intentioned changes, or at least the intent behind it was, right? So we want professionals, represented among our faculty, who are part of professional organizations, who recognize their pedigree and their contribution to the scholarship of whatever subject matter they have. But it's what comes with that in the process that over time has a tendency to perhaps shift institutions. And I often say that an institution, and I'm curious your response to this, an institute rarely does an organization drift from mission from the president's seat or the board of directors or the C-suite. It typically happens in and among the faculty, and it's one faculty hire at a time.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. And this dynamic of the wider academy training most of our professionals, present company included, I graduated from the University of Virginia, which was a secular institution. And so, I had a wonderful experience at UVA and professors that respected me, but and my beliefs, but I had to work extra hard to do that kind of faith learning integration and explore things, because it's just not in the center of the identity of that institution and those faculty and their research agendas. So I think it's important when Christian institutions hire faculty, they have to socialize them into what it means to serve in this institution. You have to build thick cultures. And there needs to be support for faculty. And I think you're exactly right. That is the main area where this can happen. And it's often well-meaning. I want to strengthen the quality of the institution. We care about excellence as Christians. Well, sadly, the way that's defined in the wider academy is not the same as it used to be. And we have to be very careful.
Yeah. Support, and I think also accountability we have to keep faculty accountable to our, and I like how you said it, our thick cultures as an organization. And it's not to be derogatory towards them, but it really is intended to keep the integrity of the mission. So what makes a college today now a Christian college?
So that's a deceptively simple question, given what I've shared earlier about the diversity of practice now. And so the basic framework that I found really helpful in just breaking this down for folks is one that Dwayne Lipton, the former president of Wheaton College, has given, which is umbrella institutions and systemic institutions. And so an umbrella model is going to provide a Christian canopy for the institution. And under that canopy, you're going to have a critical mass of voices that are speaking from that sponsoring tradition. And then you're also going to have other voices that do not reflect that and maybe even oppose that. So there's a lot more of a pluralistic approach there. And you see that the mainline Protestant institutions and Catholic institutions, many of them employ this model. At CAF, we are interested in advancing authentically Christian higher education, and we tend to believe that that follows the systemic model. And this is where the institution integrates its faith tradition throughout all aspects of the organization. It requires all full-time faculty to be professing Christians. It only hires Christian senior administrators. And the personnel of the institution, both in the classroom and in like student life and the chapel program, they're going to approach things from a particular intellectual tradition, and that's the Christian tradition, right? And so it's all inclusive, and you tend to see institutions in ABHE, evangelical Protestant colleges, and some Catholic colleges follow this model, particularly those that you find in the Newman Guide. So to kind of boil it down to what the commonalities that we'd see with these systemic institutions, there's going to be variation among them, but they're going to do four things. First, as I mentioned, they're going to have an HR policy of hiring only professing Christians as faculty and senior administrators. Second, they're going to have a board-approved public mission statement that explicitly speaks to their Christian character and identity. Third, they'll approach classroom teaching from the standpoint of Christian faith, and that can take many forms, from the integration of faith and learning to other approaches depending on the denominational tradition. And finally, there will be intentional programming that they provide for the spiritual development of their students. This is typically a chapel program plus other efforts. If an institution does those four things, then we would label them as an authentically Christian institution.
Okay. So just curious, in your process to identify that, how did you come up with those four? Is that something that's been kind of in the back of your mind? Did you do research with that? Like how did you pull together those four markers?
Sure. So if you look at the the most basic commonalities that we see from the national associations that serve evangelical Christian colleges, those tend to be there. And you also see in the literature about Christian higher education that these things tend to support faithfulness. So there are other things we could look at, like do they have a statement of faith, or do they have a lifestyle covenant for their students that governs both on and off-campus behavior? We wanted to try to be as inclusive as possible while still having a framework that had real meaning. So that it would separate out folks. I mean, if you think about it, if you're not willing to be public about your mission and state it clearly, you're probably not an authentic Christian institution. If you're hiring non-Christians as faculty, well, we see that the drift occurs there, and it's not all inclusive. You should be caring not just about the academic and career outcomes of your students, though those are important. You should be caring about the spiritual outcomes and be intentional about trying to cultivate those. Classroom teaching should assume that the Christian worldview is correct. And so those are kind of sine qua nons in my view.
Yeah. So in a moment, we're going to talk about the CAF guide that you all put together. But before we do that, I think it's important for you to maybe it's assumed, but if we have parents who are listening in, the importance of why is it even important for us to make the case for Christian parents or Christian students to go to a Christian college? Why?
Well, the college years are such a critical time in a young person's life. So if they've been raised in a Christian home and perhaps gone to a Christian school, you've had all these investments made in their growth and maturation, that they've become more like Christ. Hopefully they accepted Christ and become more like Christ over time. And they're about to embark upon this kind of early adulthood period where they're no longer, oftentimes they're no longer at home. They're moving away. They're going to be on a campus and involved with other students their age. There's going to be a student culture there, a campus culture. And there are all these other influences that are going to come into your life. And so you have to ask yourself, do I want my son and daughter to have similar influences that share my values, right? Oftentimes, especially parents that pay for Christian school, they think, okay, this is our opportunity to cash in. We're going to get a big scholarship at a state university, and we're in a fairly traditional part of the country, so they'll be fine. Well, most of the faculty in the secular academy are not going to share the worldview of your son and daughter, right? And they're going to be subject to policies in campus life that in many cases are not going to support a Christian lifestyle. And in some cases, they may actually undermine a Christian lifestyle or make it difficult. Now, I'm not saying that you can't attend a public institution and get a good education, but you have to really work hard at maintaining your faith. You have to be very connected, local church and parachurch organizations. So I think that for the investment that's been made in a young person's life for 12 years of education, it's important to consider Christian higher education as well.
Yeah, and that's it. That's where I kind of put it out there to make the case. At least consider Christian higher education. I'm biased and I passionately believe in biblical and Christian higher education, so I can make the case. But there's just a dynamic that happens generally with parents, and I think some of it may be kind of a misguided understanding that development has happened K-12, and so they're done. The church has poured into them. They're set, but with delayed adolescence today, this is the first time for a lot of traditional age 18-year-olds away from home for the first time, and the adjustments that they're having to make. You're throwing a lot their way that if they don't have a strong foundation in their relationship with the Lord, it can go any number of different directions. And recognizing too that there's no guarantee that if you send them to an authentically Christian college or university, ultimately faith is an individual's choice that they have to build that relationship with Christ. But why not do it in an environment, a greenhouse, a safer environment where conditions are set for optimal growth versus I got to really fight for this thing and the soil is horrible and the conditions are horrible, but I'm going to make it through. And parents need to students have to make an informed decision that, okay, maybe it is an academic program that a Christian college doesn't offer, that only the state university does. Okay, but at least you've done your research to find that out, and you know what kind of environment that you're actually going into.
That's right. And if I could just piggyback on two quick things you said. One is that, we're learning from a biological standpoint, cognitively, students are not fully formed when they enter college, right? So there's a lot of growth and development that's happening there. And there's a huge opportunity cost to not attending a Christian college. At a Christian institution, you're going to have like-minded peers. You're going to form relationships with them. They're going to help you not just when you're in college in your faith, but they'll become lifelong friends and perhaps a husband or wife. And so I think there's a great benefit there that ought to be considered.
Yeah, great. So I mentioned the CAF Guide. You've published now your second year of the CAF Guide for Christian colleges and universities. How are you measuring faithfulness and flourishing? You talked about the 4 categories, but go a little bit deeper with it. How are you actually measuring it?
Sure. So just to kind of step back and provide a bit of a frame, the CAF College Guide is an online directory of over 250 authentically Christian colleges and universities. Unlike most guides that are out there on the market today, we don't rank or rate or score institutions. We felt like
pause right there.
Sure.
If you are a parent looking for a college or university, those rankings that have historically been there, I won't name who they are, but
they know.
there are a lot of rankings, and there are some ranking houses or organizations that institutions pay in order to engage in those rankings. So there is a proliferation of those rankings. Just be careful, which is why I actually like that CAF didn't go that direction. It's actually a relief to know that it's not about who's number one or number two. It's more you're measuring against saying, okay, this is what an authentically Christian college. Sorry for the rant. Go on with your.
No, that's exactly right. We wanted to offer something different. Right. We wanted to provide just the facts. So we have objectively measured, independently verified, comprehensive and relevant information. It's available to the general public, and it includes all CCCU, IACE, and ABHE member institutions. We'll be adding more for the third edition, but there are 257 right now profiles in the guide. And we have over 150 measures for each college profile. So there's upwards of 40,000 data points in this directory. And you asked about faithfulness and flourishing. So regarding faithfulness, we include basic information on things like whether a college has a statement of faith, if it affirms basic Christian doctrines like the divinity of Christ, the inerrancy of Scripture, traditional marriage, which sorts of employees are required to agree with those commitments, trustees, administrators, faculty, staff. We also show the student life program. What are the policies surrounding things like drunkenness and sexual purity and cohabitation? What kind of chapel offerings are available and what's required? What parachurch organizations have chapters and are active on the campus? And then we also have measures that will help you see the institution's commitment to cultivating a Christian worldview among its graduates and the kinds of intentional supports that the college has in place to develop faculty along those lines, and whether they're assessing students on their Christian worldview. So those all kind of get at the faithfulness piece, and you really get a sense about the texture of an institution just by, we don't have to tell you, that you need to weight things a certain way. You can just go in, look at it, get a feel, and see if that's, make your own value judgments. And then with flourishing, all the standard things that you'd find in a typical guide, things that I'm sure your listeners are familiar with: acceptance rates, average SAT and ACT scores, tuition cost, average financial aid, retention and graduation rates. And we also have a robust section on institutional finance that looks at revenues, expenditures, and resources, so you can get a sense of the financial health and priorities of the institution.
Yeah. And I know in your process, because there are some out there that don't allow institutions to necessarily take a look at what an organization may actually pull together, whether it's a ranking or a summary of the institution, or whether they paid or didn't pay. But you, in your process, talk about how you validate data.
Yes. So we treated this like a massive research project. We developed an objective methodology, and you can actually go in the guide and download our full methodology with all of our variables and all the definitions, so it's fully transparent. We went out and gathered that information using publicly available sources for all the institutions. So we essentially simulated what a parent would have to do if they wanted to, or a prospective student, understand all of these colleges. And we then went out to the colleges and said, here's who we are, here's what we found, here's our methodology. We invite you to review this. And if there's something that we saw that was out of date on your website, or if we misunderstood something, please tell us how we should revise that. Provide the documentation so we can verify it. And in some cases, some documentation was private, not available to the public. And we say, we won't make that public. We're in the business of independent verification. And so we've had over 100 institutions participate in that over the past 2 years.
That's great.
And so we believe that the site is the most accurate and comprehensive on the measures that we are looking at that's available today. And one other thing I just want to say, every institution is we allow them to provide a campus photo, a logo, and school colors free of charge in their profile. You receive that and all the information that we're going to prepare the profile regardless. We have unrolled a program this year, a premium profile program. If colleges wanted to add more pictures, videos, if they wanted to add institutional documents like sample syllabi and course catalog and chapel schedule, they can pay a fee, and that's just at the top section of the guide. It makes for a more interesting kind of front porch or on-ramp to the profile. It does not affect or have anything to do with the research we do. That's a separate process. So no one can pay us to be ranked higher or show more often or to change a particular measure. But we really believe that this was a way that we could basically, financially support the endeavor without having to charge users, so we could keep it free to the public and have maximum impact. And we think it provides an opportunity both for the user to be able to see more information about the college and get a better feel. And also at the higher levels, there are 2 buttons we'll add, apply now and more information. We're committed to not selling user info, but we do want to provide ways to connect faithful families to faithful institutions. If you want to raise your hand and say, hey, I'm interested in learning more, or you know what, I'm ready to apply now, we want to facilitate that. And that's great. One final thing I do want to mention, we're very grateful to America's Christian Credit Union, who is the title sponsor for the guide. They're enabling us to keep this going through their generous financial support so that parents and prospective students can access this information free of charge. That's great. That's fantastic. I love when organizations step up and support this sort of thing. It's a critical resource. Just curious, have you gotten traction with colleges expanding their profiles to the premium level? Yes. So we just released the second edition, so we're very early kind of in that cycle, but we already have 13 that have signed up. Great. And over half of them have chosen the kind of top of the line full premium profile, so users can see what that looks like. And it's exciting to me to see, like, especially the videos. There's so much creativity with these institutions, and we're just honored that they would trust us and want to partner with us so that we can try to raise awareness about Christian higher education. Yeah, I think the strength of what you've been able to do is differentiate an authentically Christian college or university from the rest of the market. The market is saturated for various reasons. Some of it just being there are more online education options. There's more people, and the numbers are shrinking of people eligible to go to college. The demographic cliff, the enrollment cliff that we're all facing, right? Yeah. So there are fewer potential customers. But what I like what you've done is helped the public to identify, okay, if we're talking authentically Christian colleges and universities, colleges that our country was founded on, this is a very data-driven way in order to understand that segmented population. Now, to colleges and universities within that, then I think it's their role to not try to differentiate themselves from that pool, but what value are you adding that maybe another institution who's in that pool isn't offering? And I think that now becomes for the public, okay, so now you have a clearly identified group that you can fish in. Now what you start to look for is value proposition. If I go to this institution, what do I get out of the experience? Speak a little bit to that. Yes, I think that's exactly right. And what we're attempting to do really is make connections, right? So person-institution fit is so critical to student success. And at the end of the day, by us just providing what is and not stating what ought to be, but just here's the landscape, and it's in an apples to apples format, so you can make meaningful comparisons, right? And then you take this as your first step, you whittle it down, and then you get on those campuses. and you really get to know that culture and see, is this a fit for me? And the reason that's so important, we know from decades of research on college outcomes now, that if a student feels like they belong and they have a strong connection from their personal values and preferences to the characteristics of the institution, they are much more likely to persist to graduation and have better outcomes in life. And so, one of the things that I've said to folks, we've had an overwhelmingly positive response to the guide from institutions. A few have been a little nervous. Do we really want to make this all public? And I say, look, you mentioned the demographic cliff, Philip. So that's a major problem. There's a constant supply and a decline in demand. That's going to be a problem for the market for the next few years. We also have a decline in confidence, public confidence in higher education. Well, how do you solve that problem? Well, you do it through transparency. When you have greater transparency, it increases trust. And we believe what's going to happen is over time, if enough folks use the CAF College Guide and really on the front end try to understand the institution and find a good fit, these students are going to have better experiences. It's going to result in better outcomes for the colleges. And you're going to avoid that problem of buyer's remorse, where someone, I thought this is what you were, but I got here and it wasn't really what I wanted. And you really have two options at that point. As a student, you either stay and you're miserable or unhappy and you don't contribute in a positive way to the campus culture. When you graduate, you might be bitter and not give back or be connected as an alum. That's not a good outcome. Or you decide I'm going to transfer and you have all the upheaval in your life of finding a new institution that's going to be a fit and so on. And so we really believe that providing just this basic information in a common format is going to help drive more Christian families toward Christian higher education and produce better fits, which will be better for students and for institutions.
Yeah. Jesse, this has been a wonderful conversation. Really appreciate the work that you've done to pull. And I know from other conversations with you that it's pretty intense. And so here we are on year 2 and you're already thinking of year 3 of the guide. So job well done. Thank you for providing that to the public. We got 3 minutes left. So some strategies. We have a lot of leaders from colleges and universities who listen into this podcast. What are some strategies you think colleges and universities need to leverage to resist that drift that we talked about at the top of the show?
Another great question. I think that there are 3 strategies that can help Christian leaders maintain a faithful posture and practice within their institutions. So the first I would call the attitudinal strategy. The dynamic that I described earlier of operating within the shadow of that wider academy can really only be effectively countered by maintaining the right outlook. So if we are looking to the wider academy for affirmation or validation, there's a good chance that we'll eventually compromise in order to receive that wider approval. So it's really important for campus leaders to strike the right tone. We do want to interact with and partner with the wider academy to the extent that we're able, but we have to remember that Christian colleges and universities, we carry forward the spiritual legacy of the earliest American colleges. So in this regard, our institutions are just as legitimate as their secular counterparts, and some might argue even more so. So the Christian Academy, it needs no prior justification or external validation. We should be confident in who we are and project that to the members of our campus community. And then I think from that attitude flows a second strategy, and I'll call that the structural strategy. So if we're confident in our mission and our identity, then we'll want to be sure that our institutional policies and practices are in full alignment with that mission and identity. And this means asking questions like, do the members of our community have a deep understanding of that Christian mission? Have we intentionally integrated that mission throughout all aspects of our organization? And I think even just as important, have we unwittingly adopted any of those so-called best practices from the wider academy that actually could undermine our mission? And so attending to those structural elements, I think, is important. And then the final strategy, once you have the right attitude and you've created the right structures, I think the third strategy is a relational one. We need to build and maintain strong connections with aligned organizations and partners. The most important organization to the Christian college, of course, is the church. At its best, the Christian college is a parachurch organization. And we should be connecting to both the founding or affiliated denomination of the college and the local churches in the surrounding area. They provide an anchor to us and remind us of who we're doing this for. But I think it's also important to identify like-minded organizations that can provide moral support and community, places like ABHE. And I think it's also important in this day and age when the commercial has become politicized and for-profit actors can try to push institutions off of mission by, leveraging those relationships and services. I think it's important that we identify like-minded and aligned vendors that will respect our college's missions rather than try to undermine them.
Yeah. Well said, boy. We could do an episode just on those three topics. Maybe we'll do a part 2 at some point. But Jesse, really thank you. Thank you for the work that you do. It really is appreciated, and some great content. So thank you for joining us on the show today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much, Philip. And to your listeners, if they have an opportunity to go to ChristianCollegeGuide.com, the CAF College Guide is there, and we would love for folks to take advantage of that resource. We really want to serve the colleges, the local church, and Christian families.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll put a link to that in the show description, as well as to CAF, which is faithfulcolleges.org. And you have some great resources there too, some white papers that you've done, which helps leaders navigate through these waters. So until next time, stay kingdom focused.
The Biblical Higher Ed Talk podcast is proud to be a part of the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast Network. Discover even more conversations, resources, and tools to help you grow your institution at thehigheredmarketer.com, your go-to community for all things higher ed marketing and leadership.